Kevin Bacon joins us, the executive editor of Defense One, with more than 15 years in Washington defense, national security, and foreign affairs scene, and Alina Polyakova, the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy. She is also a professor of European studies at the Johns Hopkins University. Kevin, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby was on this network earlier tonight, and I want to share what he said about this new military aid.
We're really focusing this package much more closely on the fight today, given what the Russians have now done in terms of reprioritizing their efforts in the East. These new capabilities that the president authorized will help them in that fight in the East.
Kevin, I think I said Kevin Bacon. It's always on my mind. I obviously meant Barron. How much of a difference can this $800 million package make, and specifically, what's in it?
What's in it that's mostly of note is helicopters, number one. The U.S. has resisted sending direct air support for the Ukrainians. We went through weeks and weeks of how to get fighter jets to the Ukrainians, and whether, the United States couldn't provide them, perhaps they could backdoor, get another nation like Poland to do it. The concern of all of this has always been the same: trying to avoid giving Russia a reason to go into direct combat or direct confrontation with American forces and American equipment. If you have a fighter jet taking off from an American base, for example, the worry was, well, that makes that base game for a Russian attack, not just the plane that's in the air. So giving helicopters is number one. Other things that are of importance are more long-range fires, howitzer guns, 155 millimeter howitzer guns. And about 300 armored personnel vehicles, as well as also 300 Switchblade drones. This is all ground warfare, air defenses, longer range air defenses to help defend the territory of the East and face off the kind of weapons that the Pentagon says that the Russians are amassing, like Kirby just said.
Alina, I want to share a new and pretty interesting take from former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul. He wrote this in an op-ed for the Washington Post. This threat of escalation, however, is cheap talk. Putin is bluffing. He is deliberately allowing the U.S. intelligence community to discover data about escalation in order to scare us away from helping Ukrainians win. Is he right? I mean, especially when you think about Putin pledging to pursue this conflict to the end, and he says peace talks are dead.
Well, it should be in our interest as the United States and Europe and the broader NATO alliance to make sure that Ukraine wins. And what Putin de facto is doing is he is deterring the United States, which, obviously is an absurd thing to say. The U.S. outmatches, together with NATO, Russian capabilities exponentially. And Putin knows that, of course. And he has been using threats around nuclear escalation, threats around direct conflict with U.S. forces, being a declaration of war with NATO, as a way to limit our ability to help Ukraine win. I was very happy to see this new security assistance package from the White House. But I will say it is still not enough. Ukraine really needs more air defense systems to actually match the amassing Russian forces in the Donbass. They are significant, and currently they do outmatch Ukraine. So when Mr. Putin makes these threats, we need to think about what are our interests rather than allowing him to deter us in this war.
We will likely see more threats, worse threats, if we end up seeing Sweden and Finland seriously consider this NATO membership. Kevin, what would it look like?
The threats or the membership?
If they were to join NATO, what would Putin do?
Well, a good question. Look, the Russians have already warned the Finns specifically, their neighbors, that there will be consequences. But who knows? Who can blame the Finns and the Swedes for wanting to jump right in after seeing what's happening to Ukraine? They don't want to be the next Ukraine. And it's clear that Putin does not want to challenge any of the NATO countries directly. That's never been his goal. It's not what Ukraine is about. He may have talked a lot about NATO's defense. The more important thing is that what it allows NATO to deploy under the guise of NATO more forces and more firepower, more defenses into Sweden and Finland that there aren't already. There's already plenty of that in the north, but it just adds a little bit more, and it does more of what Putin never wanted, which is to unify Europe. Somebody tweeted today, how badly of a decision have you ever made that it caused Sweden and Finland to join NATO? That's how significant this is. This is something that folks thought maybe would never happen. Definitely not happen as fast as it is.
Alina, the New York Times reports that the U.S. and Ukraine are now working to break through the Russian propaganda firewall and try to spread a different narrative about the war, try to get the truth to Russians. How could they do it?
It's incredibly difficult. And of course, we're trying, meaning RFPRL, which is an independent media outlet, but does receive U.S. congressional funding, has been amping up like really basic things from before the digital age, radio transmissions on AM radio waves. They've also been putting out so-called mirror sites. These are sites that Russians can look at for a limited amount of time that surpass Russian censorship laws, but then the Russian government eventually comes up to them and shuts them down. So it's a constant process they have to feed. But the avenues for getting information, truthful information from Russians, are very, very limited. We've seen in the last several weeks, the Russian government move very, very aggressively to ban Western social media, Facebook, Twitter. I think YouTube's days are numbered at this point from Russia because they're afraid of Russians learning the truth, of course, and they're closing every single potential avenue for Russians to learn what is actually happening in Ukraine. We have a very, very long fight ahead of us, and it's going to take a lot of resources, financial resources, and really us rebuilding what we lost after the Cold War, which is our ability to pierce the Iron Curtain.
Kevin, we got an update today on one of the very first examples of Ukrainian forces boldly standing up to the Russians. Watch this.
If you remember that proverbial Russian warship, it was the actual warship Moskva, amply named, that threatened Ukrainian border guards and who told them, they told that Russian ship to go away using slightly different language. Well, yes. That ship is on fire now.
Russian state media says the same crew that the Ukrainians told to go F themselves have now been evacuated from that burning ship. Clearly, Ukraine sees this as another big win. But can they withstand an even more brutal phase of the war, even when they, yes, it's great when they have these wins, but given what they're facing?
Well, it depends how far it's going to go. I mean, I've seen the reports of the ship tonight, and I can't wait to find out the details of exactly how that was able to happen. The big concern that I've heard in the last week has been that what we're depending on is expecting the Russians to do. What everyone is talking about, this shift to the east, this preparation for a major new offensive to take all the Donbass and everything they can in that area. This could be the bloodiest, hardest fighting we've ever seen by far. That any civilians in the way, forget about it. That this is going to be, this is different than pot-shotting from afar with missiles. This isn't terrorism, China, indiscriminately aiming at neighborhoods. This is the first real attempt to take and hold a significant amount of territory. And who knows, it could be that would lead to the end of the conflict, and Putin would be happy to take that as a win or a loss, however you want to look at it. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. So how bad is it for the Ukrainians will depend on what Zelensky was saying. How much NATO and the West is willing to give them so that they can defend themselves and hold off the Russians. They could. It's possible. The Ukrainians right now have an almost unlimited amount of ammunition and weapons and supplies behind them. They have everything short of American and NATO warplanes striking the Russian forces inside of Russia. And it depends on the Russian side of how much Putin is willing to just keep funneling in waves and waves of troops and armor and arms, each one of those being less and less qualified or as experienced or as good as the former as they reach deeper into conscripts and their stores of arms behind that. So it depends how quickly the Russians can go, how much the Ukrainians are able to withstand them. But, we may know sooner than later how bad it could be.
All right. Kevin Barron, Alina Polyakova, thank you both for joining us.